How much better is Sparkle now? Well, let's find out. But first, let's talk about what changed. Her skill crit damage buff is now 2 turns instead of just 1, one of my favorite changes already, allowing for so much more flexibility in rotations. Ultimate now recovers 6 skill points instead of 2, and excess skill points can overflow up to 10. It's such a good change as well, because if you get your ult before Sparkle's turn, you can just use her ultimate immediately without having to worry about excess skill points or wasting energy. Furthermore, the 48% damage boost Sparkle used to give is now converted to 30% vulnerability. It may not sound like much if you're not familiar with the numbers or whatever, but this is another amazing change for Sparkle. Most crit DPS units that Sparkle would be played with already have a ton of crit damage and regular damage boost. The old Sparkle would just add more to that, which reduces the effectiveness of her buffs and hence makes her kinda bad. But now with a rarer and more general stat like vulnerability, the effectiveness of the buff is much greater because we have less vulnerability to begin with. By the way, this is why independent multipliers are very strong. The attack buff was changed from mono quantum to increasing all allies' attack by 45% for free, so it's not racist anymore, and even gives the ally with the crit damage boost 10% rest spend. Again, rest spend is a rarer stat like vulnerability, which is why it's a pretty good buff as well. The last few changes in the base are quality of life focused. Technique now immediately regenerates 20 energy for Sparkle at the start of battle. Because Sparkle runs energy regen rope, this means Sparkle's first skill will give you 110 energy at the bare minimum, meaning she gets a 1-turn ultimate at the start of battle, so you ramp up much faster with her ultimate. Additionally, when ally characters with the crit damage boost use skill points, Sparkle regenerates 1 energy. This doesn't guarantee 2-turn ultimates, but if you have Sunday or Bronya's Light Cone, you get really close and Sparkle just needs to be hit once or twice for 2-turn ultimates, otherwise you will usually be 20 to 30-ish energy off. Finally, if the ally character with the crit damage buff consumes at least 3 skill points in a single turn, Sparkle's next skill does not consume a skill point, further leaning into that skill point playstyle. Right now, Sparkle is best played with Archer, hence the impact of the changes is more strongly felt there. Now for Archer's third skill and beyond, before Sparkle's buff, it would deal about 676k damage, but now if you remove the 48% damage boost, you replace it with 10% rest spend and 30% extra vulnerability, it goes up to 800,000 damage. It's about 20%, but that's just a single skill. Archer obviously uses his skill many times throughout the battle. Sparkle now also provides a ton more skill points, and when played with Sunday's signature Light Cone, it gives Archer 4 extra skills in 300 action value, which then also gives Archer 1 more ultimate for a total of 3. I mean, can you imagine? Each skill does 20% more damage, you have 4 additional skills from Archer, and 1 extra ultimate in the same scenario. So it's no surprise the Archer team gains 60% increase in total damage. Yeah, his damage per action value is now almost 60,000 in a 1 to 2 target scenario. If you're not aware of how raw damage per action value usually works, 5 targets or higher target DPS will usually deal more raw damage because they are able to hit all 5 enemies, but then they will deal less single target damage, right? So then the lower the scenario gets, the less damage you do. So if you increase the number of targets, 5 target DPSs, they will deal more raw damage. But Archer is now able to compete in terms of raw damage with these kind of units. I was so surprised that I had to triple check if I was calculating it correctly, but Sparkle's buff just makes Archer the best low target DPS in the entire game. There are a few other reasons other than just more damage and more skill points. One of the pain points previously is that RMC also has a 100% action advance, right? And because Sparkle's buff is 1 turn, if you double advance with Sparkle and RMC, he loses the crit damage buff from Sparkle. To solve this previously, I would have to advance them at the same time. So I would have to time Mem's support with Sparkle's advance, and this means less damage for Archer because you cannot run Lushaka, right? So there's opportunity cost. But now, because the buff lasts for 2 turns, we can run that Lushaka on RMC because I can just advance Archer again without losing the crit damage buff. So this also adds a little bit to the damage because it's 12% more attack. And RMC also does charge Mem support slightly faster because Sparkle gains a little bit extra energy when you consume skill points, right? It's not enough to cause a noticeable increase in damage, but I realized the rotation would be slightly faster for Mem support. I think if the rotation went on for like 2 years, then maybe you would really see the impact, but yeah, it's a tiny little increase that can be useful at times. Honestly, the previous set of buffs I felt only really Kafka became much more relevant. The rest of the buffs kind of had some issues, like Jingliu still leaned very heavily into extra crit damage when, you know, she runs with Sunday, who also gives a ton of crit damage, especially when at least some power of the kit could have easily gone to vulnerability or rest spend. But Sparkle's buff this time did go to that extent, and the changes are already much better than whatever we had before. This could be a sign that we are getting more power creep, but let's not think about that for now. But what I did think about more is whether this changes any of Sparkle's builds or light cones. Most of my calculations are with Archer, by the way, and Tengoku is his new best in slot painter, beating out Routine Arena. For Sparkle's updated builds, Sunday's S1 is best in slot for raw damage, followed by Dance S5 and then her signature light cone. It's a bit unfortunate her signature isn't best in slot. We had the same issue with Jingliu and Blade, I think, where their best in slot wasn't even their signature anymore. But extra crit stats just isn't very useful when the base kit already gives a ton of crit damage. I kinda wish they changed light cone to include some energy effects or lean more into the skill point identity, but it is what it is. Sadly, it's now third place, followed very closely by Past and Future S5, and finally by Bronya's signature light cone, which means I wasted my pulls on Sparkle's signature light cone. I did also consider Dreamview Adventure, but it reduces flexibility because Sparkle must always end with her skill, so you can't quite use her ultimate halfway through Archer's actions, making it kinda awkward, so I didn't consider it. By the way, Dance S5 uses 3 extra substats because it's really hard to get to the 167.4 speed breakpoint to begin with, especially with Eagle and still trying to get a ton of crit damage to buff Archer. However, I do think Dance is still the better choice for zero cycling, because sometimes you just don't need that extra damage, but the extra action in each cycle helps Archer more efficiently deal with bosses, because sometimes enemies have some mechanics that you have to wait for their turn to do or whatever, and you get a lot more control over your rotation and what you do, which means a lot more skill expression, which usually results in faster clears in game. But if you get a ton of HP inflation, then Sunday S1 should be the best in slot. Relic sets don't change at all, by the way, still Cecidos if 134 speed and Eagle if you're using Dance. For other teams and performance in game, Sparkle is also obviously great with Sparxie. I'm probably going to show this stat a few more times in my other videos, but right now Sparxie with a sustain does about 56,000 DPV in 3 targets. Another very strong team right now. I've already showcased my Anomaly King 0 cycle with her, but I've actually also 0 cycled Memory of Chaos 12 at 3 cost. In Sparxie's team, the biggest impact I felt was the overflowing skill points, because sometimes before Sparkle's turn you already regenerate her ultimate, but you also have maximum skill points. Before you would have to waste some energy, but I can just use her ultimate now without thinking too much about it, and I'll just get the skill points back the next turn. It helps the rotations feel so much better, and you can just focus on the other mechanics. Actually, there are 2 more changes to Sparkle, and that is her Eidolon 1 and 2. Sparkle's E1 now also increases her speed by 15% for 2 turns when using her skill or when entering the battle. Because it lasts for 2 turns, this pretty much means Sparkle gets 15% extra speed the entire fight, and this is actually the only change I really didn't like. Quite a lot of optimization in Sparkle teams is ensuring the DPS is the last to be advanced to clean up the stage, which is why Sparkle's breakpoints are 134 speed and 167.4 with Eagle and Dance. What this does is it ensures Sparkle takes the last turn right about 149 action value, or right before we go to the second cycle. But because Sparkle now gets 15% speed, it's much harder to do this because Cypher also needs the extra speed in order to get that same skill point. And so it messes with your speed tuning, hence why it only works if your allies are faster than E1 Sparkle, which is about 148 speed if a build doesn't change, must also be slower than the equivalent of 200 speed. Another way to solve this issue is to try and remove Sparkle's speed boots, but that means you are missing 10 speed to get her to 134, and then you're just going to replace speed with HP or defense that doesn't contribute to damage at all, and then you have to farm extra speed substats on top of that, which may mean you get less crit damage substats because it's RNG based, and that can lead to less damage for your DPS. On the other hand, this can make it easier to build Sparkle with Eagle and Dance, but in terms of damage, it's still only about 3 to 4% increase over E0 with Sunday's Light Cone. I don't understand why can't we just give Sparkle more energy for consistent 2-turn outs or something, but the rest of the changes are still really good, so I'll let it slide this time. E2 now also gives 30% defense reduction. Not much more defense reduction than before, but it's still a great Eidolon, especially since Sparxie and Archer gain some sources of defense reduction. Overall, I think really good changes to Sparkle that addresses a lot of the issues she had before and goes beyond that and builds on top of it, unlike most of the previous Novaflare buffs where they only really address the issue and then they just stop there. With Sparxie's release at the same time, Sparkle's meta relevance will be rising a lot in 4.0, but I'm not sure if she will take over as best in slot in any other teams other than Archer, Darling IL, and Sparxie. That's it for the Sparkle update. Thanks for watching and see you.